My name is Rachel Lawson. I'm 28 years old and live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This story isn't something I'd normally share, but I feel like people need to know how dangerous online dating can be, even when everything seems fine at first. I wish I could say this is just a bad memory. But it's more than that. It's the last mistake I'll ever make. It all began when I signed up for eHarmony. After years of failed relationships, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd find someone genuine online. That's how I met Ethan. He was perfect, or so I thought. His profile picture showed a man with wavy brown hair, piercing green eyes, and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. He claimed to be 31 years old, working in finance, and a lover of dogs. We clicked instantly. He was funny, sweet, and attentive in a way that felt so refreshing compared to the guys I'd dated before. For weeks, we talked every day, texts, phone calls, even video chats. I felt like I could trust him. When Ethan suggested meeting in person, I was nervous but excited. However, when he asked me to come to his house instead of meeting at a public place, I hesitated. It felt risky, but he reassured me it was just for convenience. Against my better judgment, I agreed. After all, he seemed so genuine. What could go wrong? The drive to Ethan's house was uneventful but eerie. As I left the city and headed into more rural areas near Appleton, I couldn't shake an odd feeling in my gut. His house was off a quiet wooded road, far from town. It wasn't what I expected for someone who claimed to have a high-paying finance job. It was small, old, and isolated. I parked in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel for a moment as doubt crept in. But I pushed those thoughts aside, chalking them up to nerves. When Ethan opened the door, my heart sank. The man standing before me looked nothing like his photos. He was taller, broader, and at least in his mid-40s. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face was lined with deep creases. His eyes were still green but darker, colder. He smiled, but there was something off about it, a smugness that made my skin crawl. "You must be Rachel," he said, stepping aside. His voice was deeper, rougher, almost like a growl. Against my better judgment, I walked in. The house was dimly lit, with minimal furniture and an odd smell that I couldn't place, like damp earth mixed with something metallic. Ethan closed the door behind me, the sound of the lock clicking sending a chill down my spine. "Sorry about the pictures," he said, his tone casual but unconvincing. "I guess I'm not very photogenic." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I forced a polite smile, my discomfort growing. "Yeah, you look different." We sat in the living room, and he offered me a drink. I declined, not wanting to let my guard down any further. His gaze lingered on me, too intense, like he was sizing me up. I tried to keep the conversation light, but his answers were vague and unsettling. He kept leaning forward, his smile growing wider with each passing second. "Why don't we move to the kitchen?" he finally suggested. "It's cozier there." I didn't want to go, but I didn't know how to refuse without seeming rude. Reluctantly, I followed him into the kitchen. It was stark, with bare counters and a single knife block. The air felt heavier, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. I glanced at my phone, trying to think of an excuse to leave, but before I could speak, he muttered something under his breath. "You're perfect." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at me, his eyes glinting unnaturally. His expression twisted, and suddenly, his entire body began to convulse. His hands clawed at the counter as his fingers elongated, nails turning into razor-sharp claws. His face contorted, his jaw stretching unnaturally wide as fangs pushed through his gums. His skin rippled and sprouted dark, coarse fur. The cracking of his bones was the most horrifying sound I'd ever heard. I froze, paralyzed with fear as the man I thought I knew transformed into something monstrous. The creature before me stood at least 7 feet tall, with glowing green eyes and a wolf-like snout. He growled deeply, the sound reverberating through the room. "You'll make a fine meal," he said, his voice no longer human. I screamed, scrambling backward and knocking over a chair. I bolted for the door, but he was faster. He lunged, his claws grazing my arm, tearing through my sweater. I fell to the ground, trying desperately to crawl away, but he grabbed my leg and dragged me back. "Please, don't do this," I begged, tears streaming down my face, but there was no humanity left in his glowing eyes. He raised his clawed hand and slashed downward. My screams echoed through the house, fading into silence. Rachel Lawson was never seen again.